Hey everyone, welcome to another Halloween recap edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe. Halloween always seems like it has crazy things happen, from spooks and haunts and trick or treating, but it also, I feel like inevitably there's always some kind of epic meltdown by a team on Halloween night where they just really have the fright of their lives. And this year it was Oklahoma. Joe, no one saw this one coming. Jalen Daniels, the excellent Kansas quarterback, has not played the last few weeks, and they seem to be, while they were a great story, not quite living up to the expectations that everybody was getting out there for Lance Leipold's team. And they have quarterback Beam, and instead of just getting obliterated by Oklahoma like all of us would have expected without Jalen Daniels playing, they instead pull off this incredible upset, which I think they scored a touchdown with 9 seconds left with a backup quarterback on a passing TD to win. What an incredible upset that was.
Yeah, first time since I think 1997 that Kansas had defeated Oklahoma in football, and just a shocking development because you felt like Oklahoma was in a pretty good position. But I will say there was something about this Oklahoma team that you felt was oddly vulnerable, but you wouldn't have expected it to Kansas.
No, I mean, I was expecting them to drop a game at some point. I mean, you looked at what they just about got beat by UCF last week. They got pushed by teams like SMU early in the season. And it seemed like ever since that really great win they had against Texas, they've kind of been trending down a little bit. Um, and so I definitely would have expected it to happen at some point, but Kansas definitely wasn't the one that I was thinking about. But on the flip side of it, Joe, I mean, Lance Leipold just keeps, raising his stock all the time. Last year he took Kansas to a bowl game. They played just an amazing game against Arkansas, where I think that Arkansas ended up pulling it off in OT, but Kansas, was right there with them. Had an 8-win season. And Joe, I mean, with Jalen Daniels, it's always hard to like have Jaden Daniels of LSU and Jalen Daniels of Kansas. With Jalen Daniels, Kansas seemed like a top 3 or 4 team in the Big 12. But without him, you were kind of worried about what they could do. Well, this win right here is the biggest win in Kansas football since I don't even know. I mean, even that great year they had with Mark Mangino, where they went to I think it was the Orange Bowl and won.
Yeah, they won the Orange Bowl. Yep.
They won the Orange Bowl. Even then, they didn't have a real big win. They're not a win against a top 10 team. And I think this is like the first top 10 win they've had since like the 1980s. So, if there was one thing that anybody could say about the Lance Leipold tenure is like a black mark of sorts, he didn't really have a signature win. He beat an up and down Texas team 2 years ago in a huge upset, but it wasn't, a team of this magnitude. And so now check that off the Lance Leipold list. And I mean, if you're a Power Five team and you're gonna fire your coach, like if you're someone like I don't know, it looks like Iowa is trending towards maybe considering getting rid of Kirk Ferentz after Brian Ferentz got fired, or if for some reason Texas A&M does pull the axe on Jimbo at the end of the year, I mean, how could you do better than Lance Leipold?
He would definitely be a prime candidate. I also heard Urban Meyer say, that if he were to stay with the teams leaving the Big 12, Kansas football could be in a pretty good situation in the next few years to do well in the conference that's remaining. But yeah, I think that if you're Kansas, there were a lot of Kansas fans who thought they'd never see a win like that against OU. They've been waiting for that for a while.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and Kansas has plenty of money in their athletic department. They are putting some more efforts into football. It's Leipold strikes me as a guy who's not a real job chaser. I mean, he's been at a lot of different places. Like he won a few D2 national championships at Wisconsin Whitewater. Did a really good job at Buffalo. And instead of, maybe waiting for another job, he took the Kansas job because he was interested in the rebuild. So I think that if they can make the right offer, they have a chance to hold on to him.
I can see that.
But yeah, just a huge win right there, and suddenly a signature win for them. And maybe they have the chance to, finish in the top 15, top 20 at the end of the year, which would be just epic by Kansas football standards.
Yeah, I mean that would be unbelievable.
Uh, and Joe, the next thing that I had, I would say that was the most impressive win in terms of, big upsets. But from the big boys, in terms of really laying down the law, and in this case, laying down the duck bill, what a win by Oregon. Not just the fact that they won. I mean, I think all of us expected them to beat Utah, but it was the way they did it. I mean, they went into Rice-Eccles Stadium on College game day, and they made it to where this was never even a contest. I mean, Utah scores 6 points. They beat them 35-6. And Joe, there's always been something to me about a beatdown where if they score like somewhere in the 20s to 30s, but you don't score more than 7, seems a lot worse to me than losing like something 63-20. That's always just been a much more upsetting loss to me.
No, it just shows that your offense just really did nothing at all, and so yeah, it just adds to the difficulty of the loss, and kind of also shows Oregon's dominance in the situation too.
Right. I mean, it always goes to like, I was at the 2003 Auburn USC game at home when we hosted Matt Lyon, Reggie Bush, and all them. And they beat us 23-0. And that to me was worse than that was the worst Auburn game I've ever been to. I mean, I was at the Auburn LSU game a couple weeks ago and they beat us 48-14. That still didn't seem near as bad as losing 23-0. So, for Utah, that had to have been a tough pill to swallow.
Oh yeah, absolutely, especially the way they were playing earlier in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people were considering, myself included, Kyle Whittingham for Coach of the Year nationally, based on the fact that he was doing all this without his best quarterback, who hadn't played a snap all season, and without his best tight end, who hasn't played a snap all season.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But moving forward, Joe, I mean, I think that Dan Lanning is really increasing the cachet that Oregon has to be probably right now, I think, the number one-loss team with a chance in college football playoff. And if you look at it, they're ranked higher than any other one-loss team. And I think that, if they go through and they win the Pac-12, and especially if they get a chance to revenge their loss against Washington, I think that's a team that is going to make the college football playoff.
I think they've got a great chance. I feel like, yeah, of the one-loss teams, they would be the team I would put probably maybe is the best chance based on all that.
And what would be interesting, Joe, is, wouldn't it be great to bookend the college football playoff in 2004 to 2013 with you've only ever had one Pac-12 team win a game in the college football playoff, and that was Oregon back in 2014 with Marcus Mariota. If in the very last year of the 14 playoff and the very last year of the Pac-12, if Oregon could yet again win at least a playoff game, how weird would that be?
Yeah, that really would be ironic.
So I think there's a great chance that could happen.
Mm-hmm. I can see it.
All right, Joe, staying in the Pac-12, USC really impressed me. A lot of people would be like, well, what's wrong with you, Daniel? They barely beat a very middling Cal team. Well, it was 50-49, and I think at one time Cal had them by 20 points. That's a very underrated road environment, too, traveling to Cal. I watched the way that Auburn had to go out there, and it's a tough place to play. And I think a lot of people were talking about, is Caleb Williams going to quit on this team? People like Emmanuel Acho telling him to sit out the rest of the season. Well, he got down against a team that they're not supposed to be down against by a lot, and he came out and he orchestrated an incredible comeback, which to me I think shows a lot about his character and the character of this USC team, who a lot of people were calling them, just a bunch of free agents that are all looking out for me. And I think that was a good win. Maybe not one that a lot of people are going to find, is a beautiful win, but I think that's a great team win for them.
Yeah, I think so. It shows you some of the previous stances we used to see with teams that would maybe lose and get out of contention, maybe for the national championship or even a conference title earlier in their season, prior to the playoff era, but they would have still a lot to play for within their conference and just for pride. And I think that's what we saw with USC, kind of bouncing back and having that comeback.
I mean, absolutely, Joe. I mean, USC, as we sit here today, they still only have one conference loss right now. So they have a chance to still win the Pac-12. I know they dropped that game against Notre Dame, and they looked rough against Colorado. And was it Washington that beat them, or was it Oregon? I can't remember. They lost one game. They lost one Pac-12 game too.
Yeah, I can't
Utah,
remember.
they lost to Utah. They lost to Utah on the last second field goal. So they're sitting there right now. Utah's got 2 conference losses. They still only have 1 conference loss, and so USC still has a chance to make the Pac-12 championship game.
Absolutely, and then that would be one of the most Pac-12 things ever for them to make the game and then beat the other representative.
Oh, it would be so Pac-12 for them to take on Oregon or Utah or Oregon or Washington and end their chances of making the college football playoff, just like Utah did to them last year.
Precisely.
Um, Joe, speaking of teams like that, a lot of people thought that Florida was going to come in, and I even heard people picking Florida to beat Georgia. Now one of the people I heard it was, big homer for Florida. It played wide receiver out of Chris Doering. When I heard that, I was like, dude, are you being serious right now? Like, are you just trying to get clickbait, or you actually are that crazy of a Florida fan that you believe this? But there were a lot of people that are trying to say something about like, well, look at Florida. I mean, they got a big win over South Carolina. They beat Kentucky, I guess. Or no, not Kentucky. They got beat badly by Kentucky, but they had some other win that was kind of impressive. And so a lot of people were trying to get back on the Florida bandwagon. They beat Tennessee too, of course. But I knew going into that game that Georgia, especially after losing Brock Bowers, I expected them to be very impressive, and they were even more impressive than I imagined.
Oh yeah, I mean, for them to go out there and score the most points against Florida since 1982 in that rivalry, and like you said, without Bowers able to do it, and kind of remind everybody, how good they've been. Yeah, I thought that was thoroughly impressive.
I mean, they dropped 53 points on Florida. And, Florida, every time that people start being like, oh man, this is a good football team, that's when they go out and this kind of thing happens. I mean, they got destroyed by Georgia, by Utah, by Kentucky. And yeah, they have 5 wins, but I mean, what would they have Tennessee, which is a very impressive win that you and I've talked about this a lot. There's that weird kind of swamp hex that they have over Tennessee. And so Florida, I'd be very interested to see where they're at right now. I would say probably objectively, if you're a Florida fan, sitting there at 5-3, you're probably 1 game better than what you would have thought. I mean, you probably wouldn't have thought that you would have won that game against Tennessee. So I would say right now, Florida fans are historically pretty tough, but I don't think you can be that upset.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the record, you feel a little bit better.
Yeah. So we'll see where they go moving forward, but that was definitely tough to get destroyed by Georgia like that. And every time somebody challenges Georgia and says, "Look, they're not playing very good. Look, Auburn almost beat them." Then boom, they play Kentucky, drop 50 on them, just destroy them. Oh, hey, look, they kind of they call him lollygag against Vandy and lost Brock Bowers. Well, here you go, boom, they just destroyed Florida. So that's what Georgia's been doing.
Yeah, they had that response every time.
Absolutely. Joe, talking about Tennessee, I thought that was a great response that they had. We talked about what happened with them against Alabama. They had a 20-6 lead at halftime, or 27, probably should have been up 28-7. And you and I mentioned that when Alabama gives those chances to the red zones, the teams that kick the field goals lose, the teams that score the touchdowns win. And they kicked the field goals, and Alabama came back the second half and beat them. And it was a lot of questions about whether or not Tennessee was going to be able to get themselves off the mat, because that gave them their second conference loss. Yes, they get Georgia at home, but it was going to make it a lot harder. They had to have this win to have a chance to stay in the SEC race, and they went on the road to Kentucky. And they beat a desperate Kentucky team that is now facing down the barrel of a bad season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of changes the narrative for both teams and kind of gives Tennessee a little bit of hope, and really kind of sets us up to have a very interesting game, or more so interesting with Tennessee Georgia.
Yeah, and I think this is a big win for Heupel, Joe, because we've seen what happens with Tennessee when everything's going great, when you have the incredible offense with Hooker, Tillman, Brew McCoy, all the receivers, but we hadn't had a chance to see what Tennessee could look like when things went really bad under Heupel and they lost a game that they should have won. Now we know what happened. They lost South Carolina last year, and that kind of derailed their chance to make the college football playoff. But they responded with a great win in a bowl game over Clemson. Um, but that was that team. So I think getting this win right here and showing that you can respond to a really devastating loss and keep your team focused on the prize that is an SEC East championship and a chance to go to the college football play, a chance to go to the SEC championship. I think there was a real real strike for Josh Heupel in the positive direction. And yet again, he's won games in different ways. Mostly it's been his defense this year, but after a lot of people talking really bad about his quarterback, and about Joe Milton, and having a little bit of a lackluster year, especially in the second half against Alabama, he responded and had his best game yet. So I just thought that was a really impressive win all around for Tennessee.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think Milton, especially as you mentioned, I think that helped his confidence and we know about the talent that he has.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you're a Tennessee fan, you get Ole Miss playing Georgia right before there. If for some reason Ole Miss could spring the huge upset, you get Georgia at home, and we've seen that as great as Georgia has been at home, they've had some struggles on the road at South Carolina, at Auburn. I mean, they were just that close to getting beat by Auburn, and that environment got to them. I mean, I still haven't been to a game at Tennessee yet, but seeing it on TV and hearing from friend of the show, Junior Rosegrain, who said that's the most intimidating environment he's ever been in. I think that's gonna be a real chance for an upset right there.
Yeah, that's going to be a big litmus test for Georgia, and I think the game got a lot more intriguing with this win for Tennessee over Kentucky.
Absolutely. Joe, speaking of getting up off the mat, Auburn had by far their most impressive win of the year this year, and shut up a lot of people like me who were making jokes about the 15-year anniversary of the 3-2 win over Mississippi State. I made a lot of jokes that Auburn was going to win 2-0 this week. And, of course, my lock of the week was the under, which did hit, by the way, but just barely. It was 41.5. Auburn won 27-13. And for a second there, it looked like Auburn had not was going to lose on the under because Mississippi State had scored a touchdown to make it 27-20. But upon further review, it was an incomplete pass, and Auburn was able to stop them. And the game ended at 27-13. And those that took the under, which I would imagine 99% of the people that bet the over-under on that game probably went with the under, came away quite happy.
Oh, definitely. And I think that, just the showing that Auburn had on offense, to me, really surprised me, but impressed me as well. And, on the flip side, you saw Mississippi State with a lot of struggles, and there's a lot of internal pressure now, about what they're looking at the rest of the way, with their season, that they've got to, win some games.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, I was blown away by Auburn's offensive production. I watched the game with you had met him at the party, my friend Tyler, who was my roommate at Auburn for over a year. And when he came over to watch the game, I was just joking about how bad the offense is. And literally, like, the first play we watched is like a touchdown by Peyton Thorne. And I was like, what? And then the first half, he throws for 230 yards. He throws for 192 yards, 3 TDs, and he finishes the game with 230 yards passing, I think over 75% completions. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I think he had about 70 yards rushing too. And that's a good stat line by any quarterback, but you compare to the way he's been with getting just barely over 100 yards passing against SEC opponents. I mean, that was a complete 180, and got to give him way more confidence going into the back half of the season.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that it was almost like you're watching a different player, play at the position, and you rarely see a player turn things around like that. Like you said, with a 180. I mean, normally a quarterback that is playing, very pedestrian and struggling for the football, an improvement like that's only going to come in the offseason.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's something that you could see the improvement coming in the next season. but it seems to happen at Auburn weirdly every now and then. I mean, we saw it 2 years ago with Bo Nix. He got benched for TJ Finley, and they almost lost to Georgia State. And then he has that incredible game against LSU in Baton Rouge and gets the victory. I'm not saying that Peyton Thorne, what he did in this game compares to that, but the flip and like how much of a different player he was. I mean, I think that's pretty similar. And it went to all levels of the offense too. The Auburn receivers have been much maligned. 11 different receivers caught passes. Jarquez Hunter is an incredible talent, but he's had a little bit of a rough season. There's a lot of things that go into that. From the off the field stuff to not getting to play for a little bit the first couple games. And then, of course, just the general malaise of the offense. But he came alive in this game and looked like himself, not just getting over 100 yards rushing, which was great, but doing the really crazy athletic things that you've seen from him in the past, like hurdling people. Like he had a great hurdle over a Mississippi State player on a 50-yard run. And it made me think of this is the Jarquez Hunter that all the Auburn fans have been expecting to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really saw him, play, a great game. And yeah, I think that people have been, like you said, waiting for that. And you see that performance come out. And again, you thought that this was a part of the schedule where you had a chance to pick up some wins. But if you told me Auburn, won, I wouldn't have been surprised. We expected, I think, both of us Auburn to win the game, but just the way they won, that's what stands out.
Yeah, I mean, they were up 24-0 in the first half, 3 TDs in the first half. They scored on their only possession they had in the third quarter. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people talking about conservative play calling and whatnot in the fourth quarter. But Auburn really dominated that game for 3 quarters, which is not something I was expecting. And suddenly you look at the fact that you got Vanderbilt this weekend, Arkansas, New Mexico State. And those are the 3 games you have before Alabama. And right now it looks like you have a great chance to go into a home game against Alabama with a 7-4 record, which, I mean, I think that's a huge successful season by any metric with what Hugh Freeze has had to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, that would be quite the turnaround if that were to happen.
Yeah. So we'll see. Joe, speaking of quite the turnaround, I mean, what Pete Golding continues to do with Ole Miss's defense, I think is an excellent turnaround. I know that there was a lot of negativity from Alabama fans with what he did as their defensive coordinator, but I've been highly impressed by the job that he has done as Ole Miss's DC, which, I was really excited about him coming in, but I think even the Ole Miss fans who maybe listened to too many Bama fans are now have to start taking notice that he is an excellent hire and has really got this defense playing great football.
Yeah, he does. I think that we've seen their defensive line be really good, have quite the pass rush at times. That's impressed me. The depth of the defense has been good. A lot of impactful transfers that have come in. And this was a game where Ole Miss kind of coasted in the second half, took the lead by a sizable margin in the first half. I think they scored on their first 5 possessions of the game. And you saw Judkins have a very efficient game running the football. Dart didn't do, too much, but he didn't really have to. And I think that when you look back at the schedule, this game came at a good time for Ole Miss. I think that it was a lot better for them to have Vanderbilt obviously coming after Auburn than vice versa, than A&M coming after Auburn.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, A&M, a disappointing team, but still one that's got a lot of talent. And, that Auburn game was such an emotional road trip for Ole Miss that having Vandy as the backup to it was good timing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
But, that's the win of a dominant SEC team. What did I talk about earlier? The most dominating victories to me in college football are the ones where you score in the 20s and the 30s and the other team doesn't even score 10 points. And that's what Ole Miss did right here, getting a win 33-7. And that's the kind of football, the kind of win that I think is more impactful than any other ones, especially when you got Power 5 on Power 5.
Yeah, no, I could see that. Like that, like Lane Kiffin said, we got like a 26 or 27 point SEC win. So we'll definitely take that.
That's right. Joe, speaking of big wins and by sizable margins, how about Louisville just dominating Duke, beating them, 31-0? And Duke has really kind of fallen off the face of the planet after a really great start to the season. I think Riley Leonard, yet again, after getting injured in the FSU game, wasn't able to play in this one. But you can't take anything away from the incredible job that Jeff Brom is doing at Louisville. And I mean, I knew that was going to be an excellent hire. I mean, I always think it's great when you have, uh, the hometown hero coming back, the quarterback at probably one of the most consistently good times of football for Louisville in the early Bobby Petrino 1 versus Bobby Petrino 2 stage at Louisville. And I mean, he's taking what he did at Purdue and then, going to a place now that I think has better resources than Purdue and showing what he can do when he has those resources. And suddenly, right now, Louisville is by far the best team in the state of Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, and how about that? To think about that, they've been very impressive, and like you said, Braun been really good, and I just never would have expected, this type of first year impact.
No, I mean, I thought that he was going to have Louisville as, an 8, maybe a 9-win team because I know how great of a coach he is. But I mean, now we're suddenly looking at it that with North Carolina falling by the wayside, it looks like Louisville right now is probably the second best team in the ACC, which is shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Duke was going to have a chance to do it. Thought, North Carolina was going to be that team. But you're right. Louisville's kind of taking that position.
Absolutely. And Joe, speaking of North Carolina, they drop another game, second one in a row to yet another team. They were huge favorites. I think they were 13.5-point favorites. The week before, they dropped that crazy game to Virginia where they were 23.5-point favorites. And Joe, Georgia Tech suddenly is a team that actually has a chance to play in the ACC championship game, as insane as that sounds. And they're doing it in maybe the weirdest statistical fashion I've ever seen. So, Joe, right now, Georgia Tech, they're 4-4. They've won every second game. So that's been their thing is like each time they play one game, they lose the first one, they lose the second one. And it's been standard in that, but it goes even further than this. So let's see. Okay. So if they were to continue in that regard, that would mean that their game 10 is against Clemson and their 12th game is actually against Georgia. So talk about the craziest upset ever. They played 3 ranked teams. All 3 of the ranked teams they played, Joe, have been the number 17th ranked team. They played Ole Miss when they were number 17, lost that one. They played Miami when they were number 17, and of course won the Cristobal forgot to kneel game. And then they beat North Carolina last week. And if you look at the last 4 games, they have an 11-point loss to Bowling Green. Then they beat Miami in the Neelgate game. Then they lose by 15 to Boston College. Then they beat North Carolina. And it's just a really crazy stat. And what's interesting is right now they have a more impressive resume, at least from a win standpoint, than Georgia. They have 2 wins over ranked teams, which no other team in Georgia has. And then this is the one that really blows my mind. These two, they've scored 254 points in the season. They've allowed 254 points in the season. But Joe, it keeps going. They've scored 33 touchdowns. They've allowed 33 touchdowns. They average 31.8 points per game. They allow 31.8 points per game. And 2 of the games that they've lost, they led by double digits. Louisville, they led by 15. Bowling Green, they led by 14. And then 2 of the games they won, they were losing by double digits. They were trailing Miami by 10-1, trailing by North Carolina and 1, and trailing North Carolina by 14-1. I mean, I've never seen something like that.
Yeah, no, that's unheard of. Like that, what you're throwing, like you told me before the show, you were going to go through that. That was going to be amazement. You're right, like especially that crazy stat, of them playing the number 17 ranked teams like that. That's just beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen that before. A team that gave up the exact same amount of points they've scored, and then the double digits thing. I mean, just it's crazy. And then the fact they literally will lose a game, then win a game, lose a game, then win a game. There's no way that's going to continue the rest of the season, but it's incredible that we're sitting here 8 games in. Those stats are all there right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you're working off like a larger sample size.
Absolutely. All right, Joe. Speaking of larger sample size, we got ourselves a great slice of games coming up this weekend, and we're going to preview those in our next segment. I want to thank all of our listeners and, of course, our sponsor from earlier, Beach Ball Properties, talking about our locker room talk. You can catch all of old episodes on Spotify, and then all the old episodes we've had over the last couple of years on our YouTube channel. I'd love for you to subscribe to that. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show and like us on our Facebook fan page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.